Growing up, family was supposed to mean support, love, and understanding. But for me, it mostly meant being the backdrop for my younger sister, Megan. I'm 30 now, and she's 26, but the dynamic hasn't changed. Megan's always been the star, and I've been, well, the supporting character no one really notices. It wasn't always like this. When I was younger, my parents used to dote on me. My mom, Laura, would cheer the loudest at my soccer games, and my dad, Mark, would show off my school projects to anyone who'd listen. But everything changed the day Megan was born. Suddenly, it was like I didn't exist anymore. At first, I thought it was normal. Babies need more attention, right? But as we grew up, it became clear that Megan wasn't just the baby of the family. She was the family. No matter what I did, I couldn't compete. Straight A's, sports, clubs, none of it mattered. Megan could do no wrong, even when she was doing plenty wrong. Take my 18th birthday, for example. My parents threw me a party, which was rare enough. I thought, finally, a day just for me. But halfway through, the police called. Megan, 14 at the time, had been caught vandalizing a neighbor's property with her friends. While her friends ran off, Megan got caught, and my dad, who was a cop, pulled some strings to get her off with a warning. By the time they brought her home, the party was over. I sat alone, cutting my cake while they lectured Megan in the kitchen. That wasn't even the worst of it. When I was 21, I landed my first real job. I came home ready to celebrate with my family, but Megan showed up with her high school boyfriend and announced they were engaged. She was 17. Just like that, my celebration turned into an impromptu engagement party. When I told my parents how unfair it was, they told me I was overreacting and that I should be happy for Megan. That was the moment I realized nothing would ever change. I was done. I cut ties with my family, a decision that seemed extreme at the time but was absolutely necessary. Over the years, they tried to reach out, texts, voicemails, even messages from extended family. But I ignored them. I needed space to figure out who I was without their constant dismissal. The years without them weren't easy, but they were freeing. I focused on my career, saved every penny, and poured everything into building a life I could be proud of. 2 years ago, I bought a house, a beautiful place that felt like the culmination of all my hard work. It had everything I wanted, privacy, space, and a fresh start. It was mine, and I wasn't about to let my family ruin it. Meanwhile, Megan's life was falling apart. I didn't have direct contact with her, but word travels fast in families. Her event planning business went belly up, leaving her drowning in debt, and my parents, as always, bailed her out. I also heard rumors about shady dealings and unpaid loans, but nothing concrete. Still, it painted a picture of someone spiraling out of control. Then came the breaking point, the graffiti. It was 6 days ago. I was heading out for the evening when I saw it. My house, my sanctuary, was covered in bright red spray paint. Words like fraud and loser were scrawled across the walls, garage door, and windows. My carefully painted front door was ruined. It wasn't random. It was personal. Whoever did this wanted to hurt me. I stood there, frozen, trying to process the scene. My first thought was, why? What did I do to deserve this? But as I stepped closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Small, muddy footprints leading away from the house. They were small, like a woman's shoes. That's when it hit me. I stormed inside and went straight to my security cameras. My hands shook as I rewound the footage, desperate to confirm my suspicion. And there she was, Megan. She'd tried to disguise herself with a hoodie, but I'd know her anywhere. The footage caught enough of her face to leave no doubt, and her handwriting on the walls matched the nasty notes she used to slip under my door when we were kids. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. Megan didn't just want to hurt me, she wanted me to know it was her. My first instinct was to call the cops. Vandalism is a crime, and Megan needed to face the consequences. But then I remembered who I was dealing with. My dad might be retired now, but his connections in the police department were still strong. Megan had been using those connections to dodge accountability her whole life. If I filed a report, he'd make a few calls, and she'd walk away without so much as a slap on the wrist. That wasn't good enough for me. So I handled it my way. I took pictures of the graffiti, recorded a video explaining what happened, and pulled screenshots from the security footage. Then I posted everything online. I didn't name Megan outright, but anyone who knew us could connect the dots. The caption was simple. "This is what happens when someone can't handle your success. Proof included." The response was immediate. The post blew up, with people commenting, sharing, and calling out the behavior. Friends, relatives, even strangers sent messages of support. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. Megan wasn't going to walk away from this without facing real consequences. I spent the rest of the night repainting the front door and scrubbing off the paint where I could. It wasn't just about fixing the damage. It was about reclaiming my space. By the time I finished, I was exhausted but satisfied. The graffiti was gone, but the post stayed up. I wasn't just exposing Megan, I was standing up for myself. For too long, I'd been silenced, ignored, and dismissed. Not anymore. The morning after I posted the evidence, I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop. Notifications flooded in, comments, messages, shares. The post had gone viral. Strangers from across the country were outraged on my behalf, and friends I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out with support. But the most telling messages came from people in my own family. Some were on my side, expressing shock at Megan's behavior. Others tried to play the family unity card, urging me to take the post down. One message from my cousin Daniel stood out. "Daniel, I'm not surprised. Megan's been pulling stunts like this for years. Good for you for calling her out." It was validating to hear that others had noticed the same patterns. Megan had a reputation, but until now, no one had dared to confront her. By mid-morning, my parents' reactions started rolling in. My mom, predictably, was the first to call. Her tone was sharp, teetering between anger and panic. "Ethan, take that post down. Do you realize what you've done to your sister's reputation?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Her reputation? Mom, she vandalized my house. What about what she's done to me? She's going through a tough time," my mom argued, her voice rising. "You don't understand?" "No, Mom, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "Megan's been using tough times as an excuse for years, and you've let her get away with it. I'm not playing along anymore." She started crying, shifting gears into guilt mode. "I never thought you'd do something like this. You're better than this, Ethan." "Better than what? Standing up for myself?" I shot back. "If Megan wants the post down, she can take responsibility for what she did. Until then, it stays up." Not long after, my dad called. Unlike my mom, his tone was cold and clipped. "You need to take that post down," he barked. "This is tearing the family apart." "No, Dad," I said calmly. "Megan's actions are what's tearing the family apart. I'm just holding her accountable." "Family sticks together, Ethan," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We don't air our dirty laundry for the world to see." "Funny," I said dryly, "because family hasn't exactly stuck together for me, have they? You and Mom have been covering for Megan her entire life, and now it's catching up to her. That's not my problem." He sighed heavily, like he was trying to keep his temper in check. "You're being unreasonable." "Am I?" I asked. "Or are you just upset that people are finally seeing the truth?" The call ended shortly after that, with no resolution. I wasn't surprised. My parents weren't used to being challenged, and they definitely weren't ready to face the reality of Megan's behavior. Megan, of course, had her own reaction. She sent me a barrage of texts, starting with fake apologies and escalating into outright threats. Megan: "Come on, Ethan, take the post down. We're family." Megan: "You're ruining my life. Do you even care?" Megan: "If you don't take it down, I'll make sure you regret it." Classic Megan, always trying to manipulate her way out of trouble. I didn't respond. Engaging with her would only feed into her narrative, and I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. Over the next few days, the fallout spread. People who had known Megan for years started sharing their own stories. Old friends and acquaintances came forward with tales of unpaid debts, broken promises, and shady business dealings. One particularly damning screenshot surfaced in the comments, a group chat where Megan had bragged about getting away with things because of Dad's connections. The caption read, "Proof she's been protected her whole life." Suddenly, the story wasn't just about me. It was about the system of favoritism and cover-ups that had enabled Megan for years. The attention hit my parents hard. My dad's reputation as a retired cop was now being questioned, with people accusing him of using his influence to shield Megan. My mom, always the emotional one, called me in tears, begging me to take the post down. "Please, Ethan," she sobbed. "Your dad is under so much stress, and Megan's falling apart. Don't you care about what this is doing to us? I cared for years, Mom, I said, my voice steady. But you didn't care about what it was doing to me. This isn't my mess to clean up anymore. A few days later, Megan showed up at my house. She pounded on the door so hard I thought she might break it. When I opened it, she looked disheveled and furious. We need to talk, she said, trying to push past me. You're not coming in, I said firmly, stepping in her way. Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here. Her eyes narrowed, but she backed off. You need to take that post down. Do you even realize what you've done? Yes, Megan, I said, crossing my arms. I've exposed you for what you are. You made this mess, not me. She threw her hands up in frustration. You're so selfish. Do you think you're better than me just because you have your precious little house and your perfect life? I don't think I'm better than you, I said calmly. But I'm not the one who vandalized your house out of spite, am I? Her face twisted in anger, but she couldn't argue with that. She stormed off, yelling over her shoulder, You'll regret this. I watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. For once, I wasn't letting her drag me into her chaos. The fallout wasn't over, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't backing down. Megan and my parents had spent years pushing me aside, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. They might not like it, but I wasn't going to protect them anymore. In the days after Megan's meltdown on my porch, things went eerily quiet. I didn't hear from her, and my parents didn't call. I knew better than to think they'd given up. They were just regrouping, trying to figure out their next move. Meanwhile, the post continued to gain traction. More people came forward with stories about Megan, friends she'd borrowed money from and never paid back, former colleagues she'd manipulated, and even a neighbor who claimed she'd trashed their yard during a party. One of the most damning revelations came from a screenshot shared by an old classmate of Megan's. It was a group chat where she'd bragged about getting away with things thanks to Dad's connections. It's not what you know, it's who you know, she'd written, followed by a laughing emoji. When I saw that, I realized the situation had spiraled into something much bigger than just me. This wasn't just about Megan vandalizing my house anymore. It was about years of entitlement, favoritism, and a family dynamic that had been swept under the rug for far too long. Then, the phone calls started again. It was my uncle, someone I hadn't heard from in years. He tried to mediate, his tone calm but strained. Ethan, he said, this is getting out of hand. Your parents are beside themselves, and Megan, well, you know how she is. Maybe it's time to take the post down and handle this privately. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. Uncle Greg, did you even see the footage? He hesitated. I don't need to. I know Megan made a mistake, but airing it out like this isn't helping anyone. It's just making things worse. Worse for who? I asked. Because it seems like the only people who are struggling are the ones who've been covering for her all these years. Maybe it's time they face the consequences. Greg sighed, his frustration palpable. You don't understand the stress your parents are under right now. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, my voice steady. They've been stressed for years because they've spent all their energy enabling Megan. That's not my fault, and I'm not going to fix it for them. The call ended on an awkward note, with Greg muttering something about family and forgiveness. A few days later, Megan made her move. I came home from work to find a letter shoved into my mailbox, a formal cease and desist notice. She was threatening legal action, claiming the post was defamatory and demanding I take it down immediately. I skimmed the letter, rolled my eyes, and tossed it on the kitchen counter. It was all bluster. She had no case, especially not with the security footage showing her vandalizing my property. Later that night, my dad called again. This time, his tone was different. Instead of anger, there was an edge of desperation. Ethan, do you know what this is doing to your sister? He asked. Yes, I said bluntly. It's making her face the consequences of her actions for the first time in her life. It's not just her, he said, his voice tight. People are talking about me now. My reputation, everything I've worked for, it's all falling apart. And there it was. It wasn't really about Megan. It was about him. For years, he'd used his influence to protect her, and now that shield was cracking. Dad, I said, trying to stay calm, if you hadn't spent so much time covering for Megan, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation. You made your choices, just like she did. Now you're both dealing with the fallout. You're being selfish, he snapped. No, I said firmly. I'm setting boundaries. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first, and I'm not sorry for it. The real turning point came a week later when the police got involved. Someone, likely one of the many people who'd seen the post, reported Megan's vandalism to the authorities. With the security footage already public, the case was open and shut. Megan was arrested and charged with vandalism, and as if that weren't enough, an investigation into her other activities was launched. The accusations of unpaid debts and shady dealings weren't just rumors anymore. They were evidence. When I heard the news, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved that she was finally being held accountable, but another part of me felt a twinge of sadness. No matter how toxic she was, Megan was still my sister. The fallout for my parents was equally devastating. My dad's connections couldn't save Megan this time, and the public scrutiny was too much for his reputation to withstand. He was forced to retire early, a humiliating end to a long career. My mom, always the emotional one, started calling me daily, alternating between guilt trips and sobbing apologies. She begged me to take the post down, insisting that it had done enough damage. "It's not about the post, Mom," I told her during one particularly heated call. "It's about years of enabling Megan and ignoring how that affected me. This didn't start with the graffiti. It started decades ago. And until you acknowledge that, nothing will change." She didn't have a response. One day, Megan showed up at my house again. This time, she wasn't angry. She was desperate. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Please, Ethan," she said, her voice breaking. "You have to help me. I can't do this on my own." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Do what, Megan? Clean up your mess? I've been doing that for you my entire life." "Not anymore." Her tears turned to anger. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Sitting in your big house with your perfect life, acting like you've never made a mistake." "I'm not perfect," I said calmly, "but I don't blame other people for my problems, and I don't destroy their property out of jealousy." She opened her mouth to argue, but closed it again. For once, she had nothing to say. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with a strange sense of closure. The chaos was far from over, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Megan, or anyone else, drag me back into their drama. The days after Megan's arrest were quiet, eerily so. For years, my family's chaos had been a constant in my life, but now, everything felt still. My parents stopped calling as frequently, and Megan's texts and threats disappeared entirely. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or uneasy. The fallout from the post had reached its peak. The security footage and stories from others had created a ripple effect, exposing not just Megan, but the toxic dynamics of my family. People in our community, neighbors, old family friends, started to see the cracks in the image my parents had worked so hard to maintain. I heard through a cousin that my dad had been forced to resign from a consulting job he'd picked up after retiring from the police force. His reputation had been irreparably damaged, and the pressure had become too much. My mom, on the other hand, was reportedly seeing a therapist, which I hoped would help her unpack years of enabling behavior. Megan, though, was facing the harshest reality of all. The vandalism charge was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation into her financial dealings revealed fraud, unpaid debts, and even accusations of embezzlement. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, a punishment that shocked me, even with everything she'd done. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction or vindication, but the truth is, I just felt tired. Megan's downfall wasn't something I'd ever wanted. All I'd wanted was for her, and my parents, to stop treating me like I didn't matter. One afternoon, I received a letter from my mom. It was handwritten, filled with apologies and regret. She acknowledged the favoritism, admitting that she and my dad had failed me in many ways. But as heartfelt as the words seemed, something about the letter felt incomplete. She didn't take full accountability. She didn't acknowledge how their choices had allowed Megan to spiral out of control. The letter read more like an attempt to ease her own guilt than a genuine effort to mend our relationship. I didn't respond. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I poured myself into my work, took up new hobbies, and even started traveling. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by the constant need to fix or prove myself to my family. I also began therapy, something I'd been avoiding for years. It was eye-opening to unpack the deep-seated resentment and hurt I'd been carrying. My therapist helped me see that walking away from my family didn't make me a bad person. It made me someone who valued my own well-being. The post, surprisingly, was still gaining traction months later. People were still commenting, sharing their own experiences with toxic family members, and thanking me for standing up for myself. It felt strange to be a source of inspiration for others, but it was also empowering. I kept the post up, not out of spite, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. It symbolized the moment I stopped being silent and started valuing my own voice. One day, I got a message from an old friend of Megan's. "Thank you for speaking up," it read. "She took advantage of so many people, including me. It's about time someone held her accountable." It was a bittersweet message. On one hand, it reinforced that I wasn't alone in what I'd experienced. On the other, it highlighted just how many people Megan had hurt along the way. As the months turned into a year, I realized I no longer felt the same anger or resentment. I wasn't forgiving Megan or my parents. That wasn't something I could give them yet, and maybe not ever. But I wasn't carrying their weight anymore. Megan's actions were hers alone, and my parents' choices were their responsibility. I couldn't control them, and I didn't need to. All I could do was focus on myself and the life I wanted to build. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much has changed. The person I was before all of this, the one who stayed quiet, who let his family walk all over him, feels like a stranger. I'm not that person anymore, and for that, I'm proud. The house Megan tried to deface still stands, but it's no longer just a house. It's a symbol of everything I've worked for, a testament to my resilience. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning, growing, and choosing a better path. And for the first time in my life, I'm walking that path confidently, knowing I deserve every step of it. Story 2, 28, divorced, and betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust, my own brother. Yeah, life threw me a curveball, and it landed square in my gut. But let me back up a bit. Growing up, my brother was the golden child. Always the favorite. Never did anything wrong in my parents' eyes. Me? I was just there. Not that they were cruel, but I was definitely the afterthought. Always second best. So I left home at 18 and didn't look back. Built my own life. Got a job. Got married. Tried to create the family I never had. Then, last year, my brother reached out. Said he and my parents missed me. Wanted to make things right. Stupidly, I agreed. Thought maybe people change. Maybe they actually wanted to be a family. At first, things seemed okay. He started coming around more. I introduced him to my wife. They seemed to get along. But then I started noticing things. He was always at my place, even when I wasn't home. My wife would brush it off, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Then she dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. Thrilled at first, of course, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave. My brother's visits increased. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. He'd make comments about the baby, touch her stomach. It was all wrong. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Checked her phone while she was sleeping, and there it was. The proof. Messages. Pictures. They'd been sleeping together for months. The baby wasn't mine. My world shattered. I confronted her. She confessed. They were going to tell me after the baby was born. Can you believe that? I called my parents. Thought they'd be on my side. But no, they sided with him. Said he made a mistake, that I should forgive him, for the sake of the family. That's when I knew. I was done, with all of them. Filed for divorce. Cut them all off. Figured that was the end of it. But I was wrong. This was just the beginning. Turns out, done is a relative term when it comes to family, especially my family. About a month after the divorce, my mom calls. The same mom who told me to forgive my brother for, ruining my life. She launches into this whole guilt trip about how family is everything, and we should stick together. Says my brother's struggling, can't find a job, baby on the way, blah, blah, blah. Then comes the real kicker. She asks me for money. Seriously? The family that threw me under the bus now wants me to fund their little love nest? I almost choked. Are you serious right now? I asked, incredulous. You want me to help the guy who slept with my wife? But she just kept going on and on about how they're struggling, how it's not fair to the baby, how I should be the bigger person. I told her no, flat out. You made your bed, now lie in it, I said. But she wasn't having it. Tears, the whole 9 yards. Calling me selfish, saying I wasn't thinking about the baby. Tried to make me feel like the villain. I hung up, thinking that was the end of it. Nope. A few days later, my brother shows up at my apartment. Don't even know how he found my new place. He starts with the apologies. Says he never meant to hurt me. Like he didn't think sleeping with my wife would, hurt me. Then he tells me he can't find a job, they're struggling, and he needs money. From me. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to punch him. This guy has some serious nerve. Get lost, I told him. You made your bed, now lie in it. He didn't like that. Started yelling about how I've always been jealous of him, how I'm bitter because our parents favored him. Said I was only refusing to help because I was still mad my ex picked him. Like I was some prize to be won. He even had the gall to say I should be grateful he stepped in because my ex didn't love me anymore. That was it. I told him to get out before I called the cops. He left, but not before throwing one last jab. Said I'd regret not helping him, that one day I'd need something from him and he wouldn't be there. I laughed in his face. I'd rather live on the streets than ask you for anything, I said. Then my dad called. Same song and dance. Guilt trip. Family this, family that. I told him the same thing. No, family isn't just blood, I said. It's the people who stand by you when everyone else turns their back. And you? You all turned your back on me. I hung up, blocked their numbers. Thought I was finally free. But no, they weren't done yet. Not even close. Part 3. The next person to crawl out of the woodwork was my ex-wife. Yep, the one who cheated on me with my brother. She started with a text, saying she needed to explain things. Then a phone call, full of tears and apologies. Said she didn't know who else to turn to, that things with my brother were falling apart, that they were broke. And then the classic, you have to help for the sake of the baby. Seriously, this woman has no shame. Not my problem, I told her. You made your bed, now lie in it. She got desperate. Played the "we were married once" card. Tried to guilt me with memories of our good times. Like that erased the fact that she slept with my brother. Then she hit below the belt. What about the baby? Don't you care about him? He could have been yours. That one stung, I'll admit. But then I remembered, he's not mine, and that's not my fault. The baby isn't mine, I said. It's not my job to take care of him. Or you. You've got a whole family who took your side, remember? Go ask them for help. I hung up. A few days later, my mom shows up at my job. My job. Starts crying in the lobby, making a scene about how I'm punishing the whole family. You're not struggling because of me, I told her. You're struggling because you chose to side with my brother after he destroyed my marriage. That's on you. She kept going, saying they didn't know things would turn out this way, that they wanted to make things right. Make things right? I scoffed. You raised me to be better than this? The same parents who spent my whole childhood treating me like I was invisible? I told her to leave, or I'd call security. She stormed out, yelling about how selfish I was. My boss gave me a look. What could I say? Family drama, I mumbled. That night, I sent them all a message. My mom, my dad, my brother, even my ex-wife. Don't contact me again, I wrote. I'm done with this family. Stop harassing me, or I'll get a restraining order. Harsh, maybe, but I was done being their punching bag. I'd lost enough. And you know what? For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. I'd taken control, even if it meant cutting out the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But of course, it wasn't over. My dad showed up at my apartment, begging for money. I told him the same thing. No, you've never stepped up for me, I said. Not once. So don't come here asking me to step up now. He tried the guilt card. Family helps family, he said. We'll always be your family. Family? I laughed. You're not my family anymore. You threw me away, and now you expect me to save you? He got angry. Said I was overreacting. Overreacting? I shouted. My wife slept with my brother. You all stood by and watched. And now you have the nerve to ask me for help? He tried to defend himself. Said they just wanted to keep the peace. Keep the peace? I scoffed. That's code for ignoring the real problem. You've been ignoring me my whole life. Well, I'm not ignoring it anymore. I'm done. He grabbed my arm. I yanked it away. Don't touch me, I snarled. He looked shocked, like he didn't recognize me. He really thought I'd just cave. Before he left, he threw one last guilt trip. "You'll regret this one day," he said. "Family is all that matters." "No," I said. "Respect is what matters, and I haven't gotten any from you, or anyone else in this family." He left. I blocked him. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was a lawyer. My ex-wife was suing me for more alimony. That was it. I was done being the victim. I called my lawyer, told him everything. We built a case. Turns out she didn't have a leg to stand on. My brother showed up to court with her. They sat there, whispering, acting like the victims. My lawyer laid it all out. Her lies, her manipulation, my family's harassment. The judge wasn't impressed. In the end, she not only didn't get more alimony, but the judge reduced the amount I was already paying. They stormed out of the courtroom. I felt a surge of victory. My dad tried to call again. I deleted the message, blocked him again. I was free, truly free. It's not perfect. I still get angry sometimes, but I'm not letting it control me anymore. I'm focusing on my life, my work, my friends. I've cut them all out, and I'm better for it. My family, my ex, they were toxic. It took me a long time to see it, but now I do, and I'm never going back. I have a fresh start, and I'm not going to waste it. Update. Just when I thought the dust had settled, my aunt reached out. She'd heard about the divorce and wanted me to fix things with my family. I told her I wasn't interested, that they were the ones who needed to fix things. She tried to guilt trip me. "Family is all we've got," she said. "Then you should have acted like it when it mattered," I told her. She got defensive, said I needed to let go of my anger. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just done." She said she was disappointed in me. I almost laughed. "Disappointed in me?" I asked. "The one person in this family who actually stood up for themselves?" That was the end of that conversation. They're still trying to pull me back in, still trying to make me feel like the bad guy. But I'm not falling for it. I've come too far. I have my own life to live, and I'm not going to spend it cleaning up their messes.